I always thought I knew my own story. I always thought that my father was my father, but all it took was a DNA test, a Black Friday prank, to destroy 50 years of memories and turn the man who raised me into a stranger. And the worst part, it wasn't the result that hurt me, it was his silence. I still remember the day I bought that test like I was buying some random piece of junk. It was just curiosity, just a desire to laugh a little at the country percentages that usually appear there, but nobody warned me that certain truths shouldn't be discovered. Nobody warned me that the truth can destroy more than lies. That morning, as the sunlight streamed into my kitchen, I had no idea that I was pulling the trigger on the worst pain I've ever felt. I just spat into a tube. I just sealed an envelope, and I mailed the only version of my life that I knew. Days later, the email arrived, and with it, a wound that never healed. This is the story of how a simple result tore my family apart, and it turned me into a daughter with two fathers and none at the same time. I remember exactly the day it all started, like it was yesterday. It was Black Friday, and I was sitting in the kitchen, that same kitchen where I raised my children, with the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the morning sun streaming through the striped curtains. I was never really into those internet promotions, but that ad popped up right in the middle of my recipe video. 23andMe, 50% off only today. I laughed to myself, you know? I thought, look at that, paying to find out where I came from, as if I haven't lived long enough to know who I am. But for some silly reason, I clicked. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was loneliness, or maybe God was trying to prepare me for the blow that was coming. I remember holding that little kid in my hand, so light, so innocent. A plastic tube, a pretty, colorful little box. It looked like something for a child. And there I was, 62 years old, sitting there, laughing at myself. Well, Martha, you're going to blow into one of these things and find out it's 2% Swedish? What difference does that make? If I had known, my God, if I had known what was about to happen, I would have thrown that box in the trash, whole, without even opening it. I would have burned it, buried it, I don't know. Anything would have been better than what that test destroyed. But that day, everything seemed like a joke. I even made fun of myself, texting my sister, "If it turns out you're really my sister, I'll let you know." She laughed. Everyone laughed, including me. I was happy. It was a quiet morning. My husband was still asleep. My father had called me early to complain about inflation, as always, and I had no idea that this would be the last light-hearted conversation we'd have before everything changed. I spat in the little tube, sealed it, put it in the envelope, and let the mailman take it. And I swear to you, I really swear, as I was closing the door, I felt a shiver run down my spine. A strange chill, the kind you pretend not to notice. But I noticed. My body noticed. I was just stupid enough to ignore it. I spent the whole week without thinking about the test. Life went on. My grandchildren came to visit, I made apple pie, I talked to my mother on the phone, I had a doctor's appointment, everything normal. A daily life so common, so banal, so full of routine and so comfortable. I had lived inside this bubble of normality for decades. A bubble built on memories, trust, and bonds that I never imagined could be fragile. So one Tuesday morning, as I was sitting on the sofa folding clothes, my cell phone vibrated. It wasn't a message, it wasn't a call. It was an email. The subject line read, "Your DNA results are ready." My heart raced. I can't explain it. It was like my body was trying to warn me that I shouldn't open it. But I opened it. I always open them. I've always been too stubborn. And at that instant, at that exact second, my life began to unravel at the seams. That was the moment when the past, present, and future collided within a 3-line email. In the end, that $99 plastic tube didn't show me where I came from. It showed me what I should never have discovered. It was there, on that quiet morning, that my father began to distance himself from me. And I had no idea. When I think of my father, my heart aches in a way I can't even explain properly. The truth is, he was always my safe haven. I grew up believing he was the strongest man in the world. He had those enormous hands, full of calluses, the hands of someone who had worked his whole life without complaining. Hands that fixed everything, from a leak to my heart when I came home from school crying over something silly. With him, I never felt alone. Not for a second. I remember the sound of his boots coming through the door at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, punctually, as if the world revolved around that time. He would say, "A house needs routine, daughter. Routine is what has kept this family standing." And I believed him. I believed everything he said. He was honorable, strict when necessary, but always fair. And loving in his own way. A silent love, the kind you only understand when you get older. When I was 8 years old, he taught me how to ride a bicycle. I fell so many times on that gravel road that I lost count. But he was always there. Always. Standing there, with his arms crossed, a small, proud smile, saying, "Get up, Martha. You can do it." And I would get up. Because if my father said I could, then it was true. He never lied to me. At least, that's what I thought. There was one day, and I swear that memory turned to a knife after everything happened, when he found me rummaging through his things. I was about 9 years old, and was poking around with tools in the garage. He came up behind me and said, "Curiosity is good, but there are things we don't touch, my daughter." He said it affectionately but firmly. At that moment I understood that my father had limits. His things, his secrets, his space. But I never, not for a second, imagined that one of those secrets would be myself. He also had that way of bringing up ancestry, you know? He always talked about his great-grandfather who came from Scotland, his grandmother who planted corn in rural Tennessee, about our ancestors as if they were pillars of who we were. He would say, "Our blood has a history." And I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was poetic. I thought it was sacred. That's why it hurts so much today, because everything he taught me about family turned to dust the moment that Test opened a hole between us. And the worst part, the worse, because in none of those years, in any of those conversations, in any of those tight hugs, did I ever imagine that anything was wrong. I never doubted him. I never felt a loose piece, a break, a hidden sign. Nothing. He was always my father. Whole. Complete. Undeniably mine. But life loved to play tricks on me without me realizing it. It hid storms behind the calmest days. And while I lived with this absolute certainty that he was my hero, my father, he lived with a completely different certainty. A certainty he held on to for more than half a century. A certainty that was about to tear our family in two. But at that time, in that chapter of my life, I didn't know any of that. I only knew that my father was my rock. The man who taught me everything I know. The man I respected most in the world. And perhaps that's why it was so easy for the truth to destroy me afterward. My father had many quirks, you know? Little things that I found funny at the time, but that today sound almost ironic. The main one was his obsession with our lineage. He talked about it like he was talking about religion. He believed that a real family was one that was linked by blood, by roots, by ancestors. "Blood doesn't lie," he would say. He always said it, as if it were a commandment. I grew up hearing those phrases like someone growing up hearing biblical proverbs. He spoke with such conviction that it became part of my moral code, you understand? If someone in the family argued, distanced themselves, or did something wrong, he always repeated, "In the end, blood draws. Blood calls. Blood wins." And I believed it. Not only did I believe it, I leaned on that idea. It seemed beautiful, solid, secure. Family, for me, was a fortress built on this absolute truth. When my siblings and I were little, he always made a point of sitting on the sofa, opening those old photo albums, yellowing pictures of people I didn't even know, and telling long stories about each face. Stories of war, stories of farms, stories of difficult births, of migration, of struggle. He would say, "This is who we are. It's in our blood." And I, with my eyes shining, thought that defined me. I thought I carried all of that inside me. And in a way I did, but not in the way he imagined. There was also something rather strange, which went unnoticed at the time. Of all the conversations, all the stories, all the pages turned, my father never talked much about the day I was born, about what it was like when my mother went into labor, or if he was present, or if he cried when he saw me for the first time. He was meticulous about the history of the entire family except mine. At the time, I thought it was just something old men do, the kind who don't like to talk about hospitals. But today, looking back, I realized there was a silence there. A silence that was too heavy. And there was more. Every time someone commented that I didn't look much like him, because there's always that annoying aunt who says something like that, my father would immediately frown. The atmosphere would become heavy. My mother would change the subject. I was left completely confused. But even so, I never imagined there could be a real reason for it. Never. To me, it was just sensitivity, pride, something like that. Now, today, after everything, I see those moments as small cracks that already existed, hidden, just waiting for the right moment to become a giant fissure. I was just too young, too naive, to realize that my father was afraid. Afraid that someone, one day, would discover what he spent his whole life trying to push into the darkest corner of his memory. And to think that the man who so vehemently defended the value of blood was precisely the one who knew, deep down, that my blood wasn't his. That we didn't have the same kind of connection he spent his whole life extolling. Perhaps that's why he was so rigid about the matter. Perhaps that rigidity was a desperate way of hiding his own pain. Or his own shame. But at that time, I was completely oblivious to all of that. To me, everything was perfect. A united, structured family, sustained by traditions and history. A father proud of his lineage. A daughter proud of her father. And that's why the fall was so great. Because the higher you think you are, the bigger the crash when you discover that everything, absolutely everything, is built on a story that wasn't true. The days after sending that little tube were, at first glance, completely normal. Life goes on, right? At least that's what we think. I tended the garden, talked to my husband, cooked my soups. I lived my peaceful routine, believing that the world outside continued as before. And it did. The problem is that it wasn't the same anymore. I just didn't know it yet. The first notification from the laboratory arrived 3 days later. Your sample has been received. I didn't even pay attention. I deleted the message and continued cleaning the kitchen. A week later, another one came. Your DNA is being processed. Then I stopped. I can't explain it. My heart beat faster. My hands sweated a little. It was as if someone had turned on a small light inside me, weak but persistent. And yet I ignored it. I blamed it on the coffee being too strong. But the truth is, I already felt something in the air. Like a subtle change in temperature. A feeling that something was approaching. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was unease. As if my body knew a door was about to open, and that behind it was something I wasn't prepared to see. On the 10th day, I received a different notification. My cell phone vibrated in the middle of the night, at 3:48 a.m. I wake up easily, I always have. I picked up the phone, looked at the screen. It was just the lab app updating my progress. But that time, that insistence, it made me feel strange. I sat on the bed for a few minutes, staring at the floor, feeling a tightness in my chest that I couldn't name. Then I went back to sleep, but the sleep was light, fragmented, as if my soul was on alert. And my father, during that entire week, we talked normally. He called me to talk about the price of gasoline, to complain about the government, to comment on an old soccer game that was on TV. I laughed. I answered. I talked. But, without realizing it, I began to observe him with different eyes, as if something inside me was already preparing the ground for what was to come. It's strange to say this, but I felt like I was living through one of the last days of an era, without knowing it was the end. During that time, I also talked a lot with my mother. She seemed more irritable than usual, more tired, saying she was sleeping badly, that she had nightmares. I thought it was just age-related anxiety, but today I see that she was being consumed by an old, dormant fear that was beginning to awaken again. And then, one Tuesday morning, while I was folding some freshly laundered towels, my cell phone vibrated. Not once, but twice. 2 short vibrations, one after the other, like knocking on the door. I turned slowly, almost as if I already knew what it was, even though I didn't. I picked up the phone with damp hands and, when I looked at the screen, I felt my stomach drop. Your results are ready.
Just like that.
Such a small, innocent warning, and yet capable of changing the structure of an entire life. My heart started beating fast, so fast that I had to sit down on the sofa. My whole body trembled as if I were 20 years younger and about to make an important decision. And then something strange happened. I didn't open it right away. I stared at that notification as if it were a wild animal. I stayed silent, breathing slowly, trying to understand why I was so scared. Why that feeling that something was wrong, that IT was consuming me from the inside out. I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath. And for the first time in my life, I felt an inexplicable urge to go back in time. To hold that test box, put it back in the mail, and never have blown into that little tube. But it was too late. When I finally opened the app, my hands were shaking so much that I could barely swipe the screen. I didn't know it, but that simple gesture, touching the View Results button with my finger, would be the beginning of the greatest pain I've ever felt in my life. The kind of pain that doesn't bleed, but tears pieces of you away. The kind of pain that changes everything, forever. When I finally touched the screen and the app opened, I felt something strange, as if time had slowed down around me. The sounds of the street vanished. The ticking of the clock disappeared. All that remained was me, the bluish light of the phone, and a heavy silence, the kind that seems to watch you. And there, at the top of the screen, was a simple phrase: DNA relatives, immediate family detected. I remember the exact moment my heart skipped a beat. It was as if a cold hand had gripped my chest from the inside. My thumb was trembling so much I could barely scroll down. And then there it was. A gray rectangle, with black, almost innocent letters. But nothing about that rectangle was innocent. The app displayed my father's name, the man who raised me, who taught me everything, whom I loved more than any other man in this world, and next to it, written in red, the phrase, "No genetic match found." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't faint. I simply froze. It was as if my body had been filled with ice from the inside out. I stared at those words as if they weren't real. As if they were a mistake, a bug, a bad joke. I blinked, and the phrase remained. I exited the app and opened it again, and it was still there. No genetic match found. There was not a genetic coincidence between me and my father. Nothing. Zero. I felt my hands tingling. My mouth went dry as if I had swallowed dust. I tried to breathe, but it felt like the air wasn't going in properly. The world spun slowly. The folded towel fell from my hand, but I didn't even notice. I could only stare at that sentence that hurt more than any stab wound. That's when the second blow came. Just below, there was another rectangle, an unfamiliar name. A small photo of an elderly man, white hair, a shy smile. I had never seen that face in my life. But the app said, 49.8% DNA shared, likely parent. I remember the exact feeling that overwhelmed me. It was as if the ground had cracked beneath my feet. It was as if my entire history had been pushed down the mountain without warning. And the scariest thing is that, for a few seconds, I simply lost track of who I was. My name sounded strange. My house looked strange. My body felt strange. After all, if my father wasn't my father, then who was I? I got up unsteadily, like someone who had just woken from a very real nightmare. I leaned on the kitchen table because my legs wouldn't respond properly. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the wind hitting the window, as if the world was trying to call me back. But I wasn't there. I was trapped in that gray rectangle, with that unknown name, in that brutal truth. I tried to find logical explanations. Error in the analysis. They exchanged the data. Someone put the wrong name. But then I started reading the other details. Chromosome matching, percentages, genetic patterns, confidence level extremely high. There was no mistake. There was no doubt. There was no way out. I couldn't even blink without tears welling up in my eyes, but, strangely, they wouldn't fall. It was as if my body was too shocked to cry. It was at that moment that a memory came to me, uninvited. My father's phrase, repeated my whole life, hammering in my head as if mocking me. Blood doesn't lie. And for the first time, I realized that blood really doesn't lie, but people lie, they lie to survive. They lie in order to continue living the life they chose. They lie to protect, or to hide. And it was there, with my phone trembling in my hand, that I understood. I was about to discover a truth that should never have been revealed. A truth that would destroy everything, including my father. I stood there, phone in hand, as if I had just received a sentence I couldn't comprehend. The name of that unknown man flashed on the screen like a warning that my life was about to go off track. And the more I read, the more the world around me lost its meaning. His photo was small, poorly lit, but there was something about it that immediately unsettled me. Maybe it was the shape of his eyes. Maybe it was his sad expression, as if he carried an old burden. Or maybe it was just because I knew, my body knew, that this man wasn't just a name lost on the internet. He was a part of me. I took a deep breath, trying to pull back, trying to tell myself it was all just my imagination. But then came the technical details. The absurd percentage of shared DNA, the perfect genetic compatibility, his position on the list, parent/child. I felt my whole body heat up, as if I had a sudden fever. I mentioned his name. The app opened a small profile, one of those simple, almost cold ones. A man named Walter L. Harrison, 74 years old, resident of Montgomery, Alabama. A profession not mentioned in the profile. A whole life that didn't concern me. Until that moment, I whispered his name softly to test the sound. Walter Harrison. And it was as if the name echoed inside me, pounding against the walls of my chest, searching for a place to fit, without success. I scrolled down and saw a section called Shared DNA Segments, and there it was, extremely high match, paternal line confirmed. My stomach churned, my hands started to sweat, and I felt anger, a rage I hadn't felt in years. Not anger towards him, poor guy, I didn't even know him, but anger at the absurdity of the situation. How could a stranger, someone who had never heard my name, never held my hand, never seen me walk for the first time, how could this person be so deeply connected to me? I tried to look away from my phone, but my eyes kept returning to that photo, as if they needed to find something inside it. A clue, a trace, anything. And then, suddenly, I realized something that made my legs go weak. The shape of the nose, the curve of the chin, the way his eyebrows met in the center, and my heart simply stopped. I had that same trait, a subtle detail, a silent genetic signature, something I never shared with my father, the man who raised me, but I was sharing it with a stranger. I ran my hand over my own face, slowly, as if I were examining a portrait. And, in that instant, I felt a sharp pang of betrayal. Not just from my mother, not just from the story I'd been told all my life, but from fate itself. From God, perhaps, because it seemed too cruel to find out like that. Too cold, too impersonal for something so devastating. I clicked on the Family Tree Predictions tab, and the app, insensitive and merciless, displayed an almost mathematical message. This individual is highly likely to be your biological father. My body reacted before my mind could process it. My heart raced so fast I could hear my pulse in my ears. My vision became blurry. I had to sit down so I wouldn't fall. I tried to imagine who Walter was in real life. Did I try to imagine his voice, the way he walks, if he liked strong coffee, whether he laughed easily or was too serious? Did he know he had a daughter? If he was thinking about me, if he ever suspected, at some point, that something was missing in his life. And a question pierced me like a knife. Could he have been deceived as well? It was there that I realized this discovery wasn't just about me, that it wasn't just about my suffering. There were other lives involved, other pains, more lies. I closed the app with a brusque movement, as if it were possible to push that reality away from me. But deep down I knew that what was done could not be undone. The blood had spoken, and, for the first time in my life, I didn't know whether I wanted to hear the truth or send it back where it came from. I rested my hands on the table and tried to breathe, but the air seemed too thick to pass through my throat. Then, without thinking properly, he said a sentence out loud, to no one in particular. "Who are you? And why are you in my blood?" But there was no response. Only silence, a heavy silence, filled with questions I wasn't ready to ask yet. Little did I know that this man, this stranger, would only be the first blow. The next one would be much worse. I spent the entire afternoon wandering around the house like a lost soul. The photo of this Walter still burned in my mind, and the more I tried to push it away, the more it came back, like a ghost that refused to leave. When night finally fell and the street noise subsided, I knew I couldn't postpone it any longer. There was a question that only one person in the world could answer. And that person was sitting in my living room, watching television as if nothing had happened. My mother always had a nightly ritual: chamomile tea, legs crossed, a blanket over her knees, and the TV on at a volume that was barely audible. She seemed so peaceful that for a second I felt guilty. But the guilt evaporated the next instant, replaced by a warm pain in my chest. I walked towards her feeling like my legs were made of stone. "Mom." My voice came out hoarse. She turned down the TV volume and smiled, slightly distracted. "What is it, dear?" I held the DNA test in my hand. My fingers were trembling. "That we need to talk." She frowned. It wasn't the frown of someone who had made a mistake. It was the frown of someone trying to predict what mistake had been discovered. The silence between us was so thick I could almost touch it. "I took a DNA test," I said slowly. "And the result showed something I really wasn't prepared to see." Her face paled slightly. "Not much. Just a detail, but enough for me to realize she knew. She knew exactly what I was talking about." Those tests," she murmured, adjusting the blanket as if trying to buy time. "They're not always accurate. They confuse things a lot." "Mom, no." My voice came out firmer. "The test showed a close relative. A man. A stranger. Someone who, according to the system, has father-daughter relationship with me." The silence that followed could have peeled the paint off the walls. My mother looked away. And when she looked back at me, there was something there that I had never seen before. Fear, afraid of myself, fear of the past, fear that, finally, the truth was knocking at the door. "Who is Walter Harrison?" I asked. She took a deep breath, slowly, profoundly, as if it were a personal insult. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand," I exploded. "Because I've spent my whole life believing I was the daughter of the man who raised me. And now a stranger shows up sharing half my DNA. Who is he? Why is he there? Why didn't you ever say anything?" She put her hand to her forehead. It could be regret, it could be exhaustion. Or it could just be irritation that I had discovered something she swore would die with her. "That was many years ago," she said finally. "You were a baby. This wasn't supposed to come to light." "Not now." It felt like someone was squeezing my stomach hard. "So it's true," I whispered. "He is my father." She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, there were tears that had gathered, but they didn't fall. "I tried to protect you." I laughed. But it was a bitter laugh, without humor, full of frustration. "Protect me from what, Mom? From the truth? From my own history?" She shook her head slowly, as if the pain was too great to contain her voice. "To protect you from the pain I myself caused." Those words pierced me like a blade. They hurt. They burned. "Why?" I asked in a whisper. "Why hide this from me, my whole life?" Then she did something I never thought I'd see. She cried. "Because I was afraid," she confessed. "Afraid of losing you. Afraid of destroying our family. Afraid you would hate me." I felt my eyes burning, but my feelings were so confused that I didn't even know if they were anger, pity, or just exhaustion. "And my father?" I asked, almost breathless. "Did he know?" She hesitated, and in that brief interval, I felt my soul plummet. "No," she replied. "And you must never, ever tell." It was like getting punched. My knees almost gave way, and I needed to rest my hand on the back of the sofa. "But he's my father," I replied. "He deserves to know." "He deserves peace," she retorted. And this truth would only bring destruction. Suddenly, I was no longer speaking to the mother who raised me. I was talking to a woman who had lived for decades carrying a giant, heavy, toxic secret, and now he wanted me to carry that with him. "I don't know if I can," I said, my voice faltering. I don't know if I can keep this to myself. She held my hand for the first time in that conversation and said softly, "You're going to have to manage it." And in that instant, I realized that nothing would ever be the same again, not even my family, not even my story, me neither. I left the room as if I were walking through water. Each step felt heavy, slow, suffocating. My mother's words still echoed inside me. "You'll have to make it." But I didn't know if I could. I didn't know if I wanted to. I didn't know anything anymore. The only certainty I had was that the man who raised me, the man I called father, needed to know, even if it was the last thing I did. I got in the car and drove to his house, as if I were driving toward an impending accident. The street seemed longer, the lights dimmer, the shadows deeper. When I parked in front of the illuminated porch, I felt my heart tremble in my chest, as if trying to stop me from getting out. But I left. Because, despite the chaos inside me, a stubborn part of me believed, truly believed, that my father would listen to me, that he would hug me, that he would tell me that nothing had changed who I was to him. I knocked on the door 3 times. He opened on Monday, and what I saw, it cut me to the core. My father wasn't the way he usually was. He was not the steadfast, organized, confident, self-possessed man you were used to. He looked worn out. It's as if he's aged 10 years since the last time he hugged me. "Daughter," he said, confused. "Is everything all right?" The simple question brought tears to my eyes. I nodded slowly and went inside. His room smelled the same as always. Strong coffee, old newspapers, old wood. But suddenly none of it seemed familiar. It was as if I were in a replica of the house where I grew up, only something was silently crooked. I sat on the sofa. He sat in the armchair opposite, his hands clasped in his lap. "Is something wrong, my daughter?" he insisted. And I took a deep breath. For the first time that night, I felt genuine fear. "Dad," I began, my voice trembling. "I took a DNA test." He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. Not in surprise, but as a warning, Dad, I continued. "The test, it showed that there is no genetic compatibility between the two of us. The silence that fell was not a human silence, that it was a silence, a spiritual one. Cold. Final." My father stared at me as if I had uttered blasphemy, as if I had spat on the floor of the house where I grew up. He blinked twice, and then his expression changed, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and terror. "What?" His voice came out louder than I expected. "What are you saying, Martha? That biologically you are not." I couldn't finish. The word father got stuck in my throat like a thorn. He stood up suddenly, as if he had been shot. He walked around the room. He ran his hand over his face, then through his hair. Then he slammed his hand on the table so hard that I jumped. "That's a lie," he shouted. "Those tests are fake. It's all nonsense. It's all internet stuff." I felt my hands trembling. "Dad, I wish it were a lie. But I saw it. The app shows." "Don't show anything," he interrupted me, his voice hoarse and broken. "I'm your father." "Me?" "I was there when you were born, when you took your first steps, when you started school. I took care of you. I taught you everything." He choked mid-sentence. He choked on his own pain. I had never seen my father like that before. Never. He took a deep breath, as if trying to organize the chaos inside his head, but he couldn't. "Did your mother fill your head with this?" he asked, his eyes red. "It was her, wasn't it? She's the one who put these ideas in you." "No, Dad." I tried to explain. "She didn't know I was going to take the test. I did it alone." He stood there, frozen, petrified. For a few seconds, he didn't seem to be looking at me. It seemed like he was looking right through me, to some distant point in the past that I couldn't see. Then, too calmly for the storm that was raging, he said, "Go away." I froze. "Okay?"
"Go away. Now."
The voice came out low, but so firm that it pierced my chest like a bullet. "But I just wanted to talk. I just wanted you to know." "I don't want to know." He turned his face away, as if he couldn't bear to see me. "And I don't want to hear about it anymore.
Not today.
Not ever." I felt my whole body burning, as if she had been thrown off a cliff. Dad, please don't do this to me. He didn't answer. He simply raised his hand, not in threat, but in farewell. And I understood. I left his house with wobbly legs and eyes full of tears that I couldn't let fall. When I got to the car, my hands were shaking so much that it took me 2 minutes to put the key in the ignition. As I drove back home, a phrase kept repeating in my head like a cruel whisper. I lost my father, and he's still alive. And that was just the beginning. I arrived home completely empty. It was as if the shock had drained everything from within me, my strength, my breath, my will to exist. I sat on the edge of the bed with my phone still in my hand, the notifications open like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. For a few minutes, all I could do was breathe deeply, trying to reorganize the pain inside my chest. But there was a question burning inside, insistent, absurd, impossible to ignore. Why did my mother lie for so long? I knew she wouldn't sleep that night. I knew she'd be awake, pacing around the house, making tea, running from herself, and of course, she was. When I went downstairs, the kitchen light was on. She stood there, her hands resting on the counter, staring into space, just like someone carrying something too heavy to lift alone. I entered slowly. Dad, I tried to say, but my voice failed me. He doesn't want to see me anymore. She closed her eyes as if she had been slapped. I figured as much, he murmured softly. Your father was always afraid of this truth. That hit me in a strange way. Fear, my father? That tough, determined, unbeatable man afraid? Afraid of what? I asked. My mother pulled up a chair and sat down, but it seemed like her legs were too weak that I sat facing her, and for the first time that night, I saw the truth in her face, not the truth of the facts, the truth about guilt. She took another deep breath, as if she were about to open a door she had kept locked for over 50 years. Martha, she began, looking at her own hands. Before you were born, before I married your father, life was very different. Things were more rigid, more closed, more cruel. Women had less of a voice. And the choices were always a trade-off of pain. I waited. She seemed to be pulling each word from a deep, dusty place within her memory. In 1968, I was too young, she continued. Young, vulnerable, alone. And I fell in love with a man who, well, he wasn't like his father. He didn't have the same stability. He didn't have the same kindness. He was too intense. He had too many plans. Too many promises. I don't know if I loved him, or if I just loved the way he made me feel. Her voice trembled, such a small detail, but it said so much. I got pregnant, she said finally. And when I told him, everything changed. He didn't want to take responsibility. He said he wasn't ready, that he had better things to do, that a baby would ruin his life. She shook hands. He left me. Without looking back, I felt a chill run down my spine. That man, I whispered. Walter? She hesitated. His name wasn't Walter, she replied. Walter must have been a donor, whom they used instead. But, yes, the man who abandoned me is the root of this tragedy. I was confused. What do you mean by used it instead? I asked. What does that mean? She ran a hand over her face, tired, exhausted. Your grandmother did everything. She didn't want the family to be tarnished. She didn't want me to have a child by a man who disappeared. She used to say that a decent girl doesn't get pregnant before marriage. She made quotation marks with her fingers, with an old bitterness. She took me to a clinic, one of those clandestine ones, the ones that mix treatments. It was supposed to fix everything. Her voice faltered. I didn't want to. I cried. I screamed. I said I wasn't going to give you up. And she did what she thought she had to do. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. What did she do? My mother took a deep breath, the kind of breath one takes before confessing something that could destroy one's own soul. She switched the records, mixed up identities, and, without me knowing, without telling me, without consulting me, she signed papers. Papers that said the child's father was the man I was about to marry. She looked at me with eyes that held 50 years of regret. Your father thought you were his daughter. He believed it. He believed it completely. An enormous silence settled between us. He never knew, she added. Never, Martha. And when you were born, he loved you so much that I didn't have the heart to destroy that. Not even your grandmother would let me. She swallowed hard. I stayed quiet. Forever. I felt my throat close up. Why didn't you ever tell me? She let out a suppressed sob. Because you are the most beautiful and purest thing in my life. Because I didn't want you to feel unwanted. Because I didn't want you to carry the shame that I carried. And finally, because your father was too good a man for me to destroy. I rested my hands on the table, trying to contain the weight of the revelation. My father loved me, believing that I was his. My mother raised me carrying a secret that consumed her. My grandmother shaped my destiny without my permission. And I was the result of all of that. A mistake, an accident, a secret, a blessing in the midst of chaos? I didn't know. All I knew was that my life, my entire story, had just been rewritten before my eyes. And the worst part? The worst? This revelation was nothing compared to what was to come. I didn't sleep that night. Not for a single minute. The sky darkened, then cleared, then darkened again inside me, as I stared at the ceiling, my chest tight and my mind spinning in circles. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's face, not the angry face from the argument, but the face of all our memories. His smile when he saw me walk for the first time, the way he held my bicycle while I was trying to pedal, the proud look on her face when she saw me graduate from school, his heavy hand on my back when my first child was born. And now, everything seemed so far away. Cold, irrecoverable. Morning arrived, and I didn't even notice. I only realized it when my cell phone vibrated. It was a message from my father. I don't want to talk about it. If that were all, perhaps I would still have hope, but then another message came. I need space. And then another. Please respect me. I felt like someone had erased a part of me, and that was exactly what was happening. Over the following weeks, my father simply disappeared. He didn't physically disappear. He didn't change his address. He didn't travel. He didn't leave. But emotionally, spiritually, affectively, he lost track of me. I would call, he wasn't answering, I was sending messages. He would see the message, but not respond. I was trying to visit him. He would leave the lights off to pretend he wasn't home. And when rarely he did reply, the messages were short, cold, almost bureaucratic. I'm busy. I can't right now. Take care. I read those words as one reads a note left by a stranger. One day, I mustered up the courage and knocked on his door 3 times, as I always did. But he took so long to open it that I was almost about to leave. When he finally opened it, he didn't look me in the eye. He didn't invite me in. He stood there in the doorway, as if I were a neighbor who had come to complain about the loud music. Dad, I tried to say. He raised his hand, asking for silence. Martha, I still love you, but I need to understand who I am now. That sentence destroyed me inside, because I always thought the question was mine. Who am I? But now I saw that he was lost too. The revelation had ripped something away from him, something he might never get back. There's nothing to understand, I whispered. I'm still your daughter. He finally raised his eyes, and there was so much pain there that I almost regretted taking the test. Daughter, he said, his voice breaking. When you were born, I thought God had given me a gift, the best gift of my life. And now I feel like I've been deceived, that my story has been stolen. He took a deep breath. Did I need time to accept that what I valued most wasn't true? The words hit me so hard that I had to put my hand on the wall to keep from falling. Dad, I tried to touch his hand, but he took a step back. It was as if my touch burned. Not now, he murmured. Please, not now. And he closed the door. I stood there on the balcony, feeling the world slowly turn, while a cold wind passed between my legs. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the wooden door, as if it could open again. But she didn't open it, not that day, not even the next day, not even the following week. That's how it was, in such a simple and brutal way, that the man who raised me decided he was no longer my father. And the worst part is that I understand, and precisely because I understand, it hurts even more. Because losing someone who dies is already devastating, but to lose someone who is alive, who breathes, who walks through the same city as you, that's a type of death that doesn't have a funeral. It's a silent grief, and oh flowers, and oh goodbye. And I was grieving that loss every day. The following days were a silent turmoil within me. I would wake up and, for a few seconds, forget everything. I would take a deep breath, smell the coffee, listen to the birds outside, and for a moment, it seemed that life was still mine, but all it took was opening my phone, looking at the empty kitchen, or remembering my father's closed door, and it all came back with double the force. And it was during that period, in that emotional limbo between pain and trying to keep breathing, that I started doing what I always do when I'm lost. I started looking for answers that I perhaps didn't even want to find. I opened the app again for the 10th, 20th, 30th time. I already knew every line, every number, every percentage, but still, I read it again, that IT was like staring at an open wound, only to confirm that it was really there. And, inevitably, my eyes fell on his name again. Walter L. Harrison. A stranger. A man I'd never seen, never heard of, never imagined existed, and who carried half of my DNA within him. I took a deep breath and clicked on the profile. I don't know if it was courage, desperation, or just the desire to know who I am. Maybe a little bit of everything. This time, I paid attention to the details that my shock had previously prevented me from seeing. There was a mini biography, simple, cold, year of birth, current city, a list of shared traits that the app automatically generated. Tendency to have brown eyes, a predisposition to high blood pressure, above average musical ability, sensitivity to bitter tastes. I swallowed hard. All those features were mine. I browsed through the app's tabs as if strolling through a house that should be yours, but which seems far too strange, and then I found something I hadn't noticed before. Send a message. For a few seconds, I stood completely still. The idea of clicking that button seemed insane, but the idea of not clicking seemed even worse. My finger trembled when I touched the option. A text box opened, and I stood there, staring at that empty space, not knowing how to begin. Hello. I think we might be related. I deleted it. Hi. I'm trying to understand a DNA match, and I deleted it again. Walter, I don't know who you are, but I deleted it again. Nothing seemed to be enough. Nothing seemed suitable to start a conversation with someone who could be responsible for my existence, albeit unintentionally. Finally, I wrote something simple. Hi, my name is Martha. I think we might share some DNA. I would like to understand how we are connected. I sent it before my courage evaporated. My heart was pounding in my throat. I felt ridiculous, desperate, scared, but also strangely relieved because, for the first time in days, I had done something. The decision was made, searching for a piece of myself that was lost. I stared at the screen for a few minutes, waiting for an immediate response, as if destiny were right there, on the other side of the message, ready to receive me. But nothing happened. The screen remained cold, empty, unchanged. I sighed in frustration and put my phone down on the counter. I tried to get back into my routine. I made coffee, arranged the pillows, folded clothes, but everything felt mechanical. It's as if I'm just dragging my feet through time. An hour later, when I had completely given up on receiving anything, my cell phone vibrated. A single, short vibration, the simplest sound in the world, but it made my heart stop. I ran to the counter. I picked up my cell phone with trembling hands. And there it was. A reply message, share. Hello, Martha. Yes, I saw the match too. I've been surprised. If you want, we can talk. A shiver ran down my spine. I read and reread that sentence dozens of times. Each word hit me in a different way. I've been surprised. That was not indifference. That IT wasn't coldness. That IT was impactful. Perhaps shock. Perhaps fear. Perhaps recognition. I sat down at the table, my cell phone in my hands, and my mind was spinning like a hurricane. Who is this man? What did he know? What didn't he know? Did he suspect something from the past? Or was this discovery as unexpected for him as it was for me? And in the midst of all this confusion, a question struck me like a lightning bolt. If he really is my father, is he also going through the same pain that I am? I had no answers. Not yet. But I was about to find out. Thanksgiving has always been the most important holiday for our family. Much more so than Christmas, much more so than New Year's. My father insisted on keeping the tradition alive. Roast turkey, a large table, a flowered tablecloth, everyone bringing a special dish. He always said that Thanksgiving wasn't about food. It was about gratitude, about being together, about remembering where we came from. And in that year, for the first time, he wasn't there. I woke up early that day. The sky was gray, stifling, carrying that foreboding feeling that nobody likes to admit. I cooked the turkey the same way he taught me, well seasoned, slow roasted, basting with broth every hour. But as the smell filled the kitchen, the air felt heavy, as if every part of that house knew that his place would be empty. My mother arrived carrying a tray of mashed potatoes. My children came with their desserts. My brothers brought salads and bread. Everyone was there, everyone but him. And nobody said anything. It was as if we had silently agreed that saying his name was too dangerous, as if pronouncing my father could cause the entire table to collapse. We set the table. I placed the plates slowly, one at a time, with exaggerated delicacy, trying not to think about the fact that, for decades, the first place I tidied up was always his. His favorite chair in the corner remained empty, pulled forward, as if someone were about to sit there at any moment. But nobody sat down, and the emptiness of that chair was so loud, so deafening, that it filled the entire room. It was meant to be a moment of unity, but each of us carried a different kind of pain. My mother, with her swollen eyes and constant averted gaze, seemed to be consumed by remorse. My brothers stared at me with a mixture of pity and confusion, as if they, too, no longer knew who I was. My children kept trying to break the tension, but even they could tell the food was bitter that day. And then, when everyone was seated, I found myself facing the saddest scene of my life. My whole family sitting in silence, with an empty chair screaming louder than any words. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, trying to hold back the tears, but they came. They arrived silently, lukewarm, heavy. Because at that moment, I realized something that hurt more than anything else. To them, I had been the harbinger of destruction, the person who opened the box that everyone had spent their entire lives avoiding, the daughter who unintentionally destroyed her own father, the woman who broke a decades-old tradition with a simple breath into a plastic tube. It was unfair, I know, but feelings don't always obey justice. My mother placed her hand on mine, the first display of tenderness since the truth came out. "Everything will be all right, daughter," she whispered, but without conviction. "He just needs time." Time, such a short, innocent word, but that night, it felt like a sentence. We ate dinner almost in silence. The conversations were superficial, harmless, carefully chosen so as not to touch on sensitive issues. Nobody mentioned his name. Nobody asked, and no one commented. It was as if he had died, but we all knew he was alive, just 10 minutes away, sitting alone, refusing to share the table with the daughter he raised his whole life. When I went to put the dishes away in the kitchen, I heard my mother crying softly in the living room. I stopped at the door, too afraid to offer comfort. Because of her pain, it was different from mine. I lost my father. She lost her own narrative, the lie he maintained for 50 years, the silent pact between her and the past. At the end of the night, when everyone had left and the house was empty, I sat alone at the table, looking at his chair. And it was at that moment that I realized with a deep, intimate, cutting pain that there were two types of absence. The absence of someone who was never really in your life, and the absence of someone who was always there until they were no longer there. This second, it is the one that destroys the soul. It's been weeks, whole weeks, without hearing my father's voice, without a good morning, without a short audio message, without a rushed message. With each passing day, I tried to convince myself that it was temporary, that he just needed time, as everyone insisted. But deep down, I knew that something inside him had broken, and that it might never go back to the way it was. I tried to respect his space. I tried not to send too many messages. Don't show up unexpectedly. Do not press. But how can a daughter not miss her father? How can you breathe when half your chest is missing? Then, on a rainy morning, one of those mornings that leaves the whole street smelling of wet earth, my cell phone vibrated. I wasn't expecting any message. I was washing dishes, lost in my own thoughts, when I heard the sound. I looked at the screen, and my hands got cold. It was a message from him. Simple, short, but from him. "We can talk." My heart was racing so fast I had to lean on the sink. A whirlwind of emotions overwhelmed me all at once. Relief, fear, hope, pain, all mixed together. I replied immediately, "Yes."
Where?
He sent the address of the coffee shop that was near his house at a place where he used to have coffee alone on Sundays. I grabbed my coat and ran out. Even though the rain was getting heavier, I didn't want to be late, I didn't want to miss the opportunity, and most importantly, I didn't want to lose my father forever. When I entered the cafeteria, the doorbell rang, and I saw him, sitting at a table in the corner, near the window, with a coffee in front. The shoulders were hunched, and a gaze that carried more weight than my entire age. He slowly raised his eyes. When he saw me, he didn't smile, but he didn't look away either. I sat facing him, my heart pounding in my hands. For a few seconds that lasted far too long, we just stared at each other. And then he said, I needed to see you." His voice was low, stiff, almost breaking. "I needed to look into your eyes." I felt a lump forming in my throat. "Dad, I missed you so much." He raised his hand, asking for silence, not in a harsh way, but in a sad way, deeply sad. "I'm not angry with you, Martha," he said. "I never have been." I didn't expect to hear that, and that broke me down. "I'm angry with," he took a deep breath, as if it were difficult to say the next word. "With life, with the past, with choices that weren't mine, with the lie that accompanied me for 52 years. His eyes welled up with tears, but he blinked rapidly to stop them from falling. "You didn't do anything wrong," he repeated. "But you opened a door I didn't know existed. A door I never wanted to open. And now, everything is different in here," he pointed to his chest. My heart ached. "Dad, I'm still the same person. I'm your daughter. I always have been." He looked at me with such human, deep, and real pain that I could barely hold his gaze. "You're my adopted daughter," he said, his voice faltering. "And I love you for it. But," he swallowed hard, "I don't know how to be your father now that I know that, biologically, I'm not." It was like getting punched in the stomach. Not because he didn't love me, but because I realized finally that his identity had been destroyed along with mine. He continued, "I've spent my whole life believing that blood mattered, that it defined us, that it was what made us a family." His voice trembled. "But now I feel like everything I believed in has crumbled." I took a deep breath, trying to hold myself together. "Dad, what if you're wrong?" My voice came out low. "What if it's not blood? What if it's always been love?" He closed his eyes for a moment. I could see the struggle within him, the conflict between the man who raised me and the man the truth was trying to transform. When he opened his eyes, he said, "I need time." It was the same phrase from the beginning, but with a different weight. Now I understood what he meant. He picked up his coat, stood up slowly, and placed his hand on my shoulder. A brief touch, quickly, but it carried with it a lifetime of memories. "Don't give up on me," he murmured. "Just let me breathe."
And he left.
I sat there, staring at his still warm cup, feeling the aroma of coffee mingling with the rain, trying to hold back the tears, trying to believe that, even after everything, there was still hope. But one thing I knew for sure. I had my father back, but not really. And this half-presence, it was almost as painful as total absence. I spent entire days staring at his message, reading and rereading it so many times that it seemed engraved in my mind. "If you want, we can talk." He was simple. He was friendly, but I was carrying a weight that I couldn't express in words. Ultimately, what does it mean to sit face to face with the man who shares half your DNA, but none of your history? The truth is, I procrastinated on the meeting. I kept telling myself that I needed to wait for my father to get settled, that I needed to process everything better, that she needed to be emotionally prepared. But deep down, I was scared, that I was afraid of what I would find, that I was afraid of what I would feel, fear of what he would feel. And then, on a quiet night, while the whole house slept, I received another message from him. "I'll be in town this week. If you prefer, we can meet in a public place." My heart tightened so much that I felt my stomach churn. He was coming towards me. He was really willing to see me. I replied with trembling hands, "Yes. Let's meet." We arranged to meet at a discreet corner cafe, one of those with dim yellow lighting and the aroma of warm bread. I arrived 10 minutes early. My leg was trembling uncontrollably, as if my body was trying to escape before my mind could even realize it. And then he came in, a tall gentleman with neatly combed white hair, round glasses, and a light-colored dress shirt. He walked slowly, with a certain shy elegance, like someone who had always had more books than friends. When our eyes met, I felt my heart race in an almost childlike way. It was him. He was the man in the photo. But live, it was even more so. There was something in the way he held the cup, the way he walked, his serious expression, something that, for a second, seemed all too familiar. He approached the table. He smiled, but it wasn't a light smile. It was the kind of smile that carries uncertainty. "Martha?" he asked. I simply nodded. He sat down slowly, as if afraid that the world would collapse if he made any sudden movement. For a long 5 seconds, none of us said anything. Then he took a deep breath and began. "I don't know where to begin." "Neither do I replied with a nervous laugh. "I don't think there's a manual for this." He smiled slightly, relieved that I had broken the ice, but still there was something tense in the air. He looked at my hands, then at my face. I could feel him analyzing me, not out of curiosity, but out of shock. "You have—" he hesitated. "You have my mother's eyes." I felt my hands go cold, and Owen had ever said that before. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if looking into the past. "I didn't know," she said, with almost painful sincerity. "I never knew that someone could be a part of me." My eyes widened. "Didn't you suspect anything?" He shook his head. "I donated when I was young. It was an experimental program at the time. I needed the money. I never imagined that. I never thought that this could come back one day." Donation. The word kept echoing in my head. There was no romance. There were no forbidden stories. There was no secret meeting. There was a clinical procedure, an exchange, a decision he made without knowing the eternity it would carry. I felt a sudden wave of anger, not because of him, but because of everything, because of the confusion, through chaos, because of the lies, through DNA that now united two people who had absolutely nothing in common besides genetics. He continued, in a low voice. "When I saw the mail, my heart raced. I felt fear. I felt curiosity. I felt guilt. Even though I hadn't done anything wrong." He took a deep breath. "And I felt a desire to meet you." That sentence caught me off guard. I looked at him, my eyes burning. "I don't know what you expect from me," I said honestly. "I don't know if I want a new father. I already have one." My voice was trembling. "Even if he doesn't want to see me right now." He lowered his gaze respectfully. "I didn't come to replace anyone," he replied. "I don't want a place that isn't mine." And then he looked up at me. "I just want to understand who you are and who I was before you existed." I took a deep breath. The conversation continued. We talked about childhood, about music, about random preferences, and little by little, I realized something that left me strangely broken inside. He was kind, he was calm, he was polite, he was everything a good man could be. But he wasn't my father. And this truth was so strong, so definitive, so non-negotiable. I felt the pain rising like a tide inside me. He gave me a sad smile when we said goodbye. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I know it's not easy." I shook his hand. "It's not easy for any of us." And I left the cafe with a bitter feeling, not because he was a bad person, not because I was disappointed, but because, for the first time, I understood the true weight of what happened to me. I had two fathers, and at the same time I didn't have any. After that encounter with Walter, I arrived home feeling as if I had returned from a place where I didn't belong. I opened the door slowly, placed my bag on the sofa, and stood in the dark room for long minutes, listening only to my own breathing. It was there, in that heavy silence, that a truth I didn't want to face dawned on me. I had met my biological father, and I didn't feel anything like what I imagined I would feel. No heat at all. Reunion. Here, and no recognition whatsoever. The only thing I felt was distance. The distance was so great that it felt like an entire city separated us. I sat on the edge of the bed and, for the first time, let the tears fall without fighting them, because meeting Walter didn't bring me closer to him. It distanced me even further from the man I had loved since birth. And the cruelest part is that I understood exactly why. The love I felt for my father, my real father, it had nothing to do with genetics. It was made of memories. It smells like coffee, with calloused hands holding mine, conversations at sunset, advice of presence of shared life. And now I was between two men. One who gave me his blood, another one who gave me life. And I no longer knew where I fit in. In the following days, it was like living in division. Part of me was trying to accept that Walter was part of my story, whether I liked it or not. And another part of me tried to win my father back, even knowing that he was drifting further away each day, like someone walking into a thick fog. I looked at old photos, me as a child in his lap, me learning to walk, me holding his hand at graduation, and it all hurt as if someone had thrown the memories into the fire, because now, every time I saw our photos, my mind whispered, "He loved you," believing a lie. And that sentence hurt me more than the whole DNA story. I wanted to scream at my mother. Did I wanted to blame the clinic? Did I wanted to blame the past? Did I wanted to blame fate? But in the end, the blame always ended up falling on me. Because I took the test, for opening the door, for bringing everything to light. At the same time, I felt like I was both too much of a daughter and not enough of a daughter, torn into two halves that didn't fit together. Sometimes I dreamed about my father. I dreamt that he would walk through the kitchen door with that proud smile, saying, "Honey, this is just a phase. Come here," and I would run into his arms just like when I was little. But when he woke up, the pillow was wet, and reality reminded me that he was still alive, but not with me. Walter was trying. He sent short, kind, respectful messages. He treated me with care, not like a daughter, but like someone who could become something important, should life so desire. But it was strange that it was cold, that it was too technical. I didn't know how to love a man who wasn't part of my story, and I didn't know how to stop loving the man who raised me. It was like being on a bridge that leads nowhere. On one side, the blood, on the other hand, there is love, and me, stuck in the middle, not knowing where to put my feet. Some nights, I would sit on the sofa with a cup of tea and stare at the door, imagining that my father might walk in at any moment, but he wouldn't go in. And then I realized another painful truth. I was a daughter with two fathers, and at the same time, a daughter without any. Because the father God truly gave me was alive, breathing, walking around, but he no longer knew how to love me, and the father that God placed in my genetic makeup didn't know how to recognize me. And me, I was just a woman trying to stitch together a torn identity, stitch by stitch, without knowing if I would ever be able to recognize myself in the mirror again. The months passed like someone dragging an anchor tied to their ankle, slow, heavy, noisy inside, and silent on the outside. I no longer had arguments with anyone. He didn't raise his voice. She didn't cry in front of others. But inside, something within me kept breaking, piece by piece, every time I remembered that nothing would ever be the same again. The man who raised me is still alive, but distant. Sometimes I would reply to a message, sometimes not. Sometimes he would answer the phone, only to say that he couldn't talk, and then he would go weeks in silence, as if I were an uncomfortable memory he was trying to push to the back of his mind. My mother, on the other hand, seemed to shrink. She was walking more slowly, he spoke less, and often I would find her sitting on the sofa, staring out the window as if searching the sky for some explanation for the choices she made decades ago. I couldn't stay angry with her for very long, because little by little I understood something harsh, cruel, and human. She never planned to destroy anything. He was just trying to survive his own life. And the biological father, Walter, continued sending messages, respectful, kind, shy. He didn't invade. It wasn't required, and I just was there at a silent presence, trying to exist without causing harm. That we talked about trivial things, music, books, family. That I learned pieces of it like someone putting together a jigsaw puzzle of an image that may never make complete sense. But no matter how hard I tried, I wasn't feeling what I should have been feeling. I didn't feel what the world romanticizes when it talks about finding roots. Because finding roots doesn't mean you'll flourish. Sometimes it means digging into the ground and discovering a knot that nobody wanted to see. And amidst all of this, in the midst of two men who didn't know how to be fathers, amidst a mother who didn't know how to ask for forgiveness, in the midst of a family that didn't know how to look at me without remembering the lie that had sustained us for half a century, I had to learn one of the hardest lessons of my life. Not all truth sets you free. Some truths break down. I grew up believing that honesty was always the way to go, that light always triumphed over darkness, that the truth always brought peace. But now, sitting alone at the kitchen table, with two empty cups in front of me, one for each parent I could never bring together, I realized that this wasn't true. Sometimes, the truth is a blade. Sometimes, the truth destroys more than it repairs. Sometimes, the truth doesn't save anyone. My father was never the same again. He never felt comfortable next to me again. He never again called me my girl, with that sparkle in his eyes that I loved so much. He didn't hate me that I didn't blame myself. He just didn't know how to exist near me. And this form of loss, slow, silent, gradual, is the worst of all, because it doesn't have a date. There is no last hug. There is no goodbye. It's a grief that never ends. And yet, even with everything burning inside, I learned something important. I haven't stopped being a daughter. I just lost the place where I thought I belonged. And now I continue with this open wound, but I'm learning to live with it, learning to accept that my father gave me his love, completely, even though he believed in a story that wasn't real, and that love cannot be erased by a DNA test result. Life didn't give me the ending I wanted, not even the repair, not even a happy ending. Life has given me the truth. And the truth is, sometimes it's all that's left when the story ends.